Lucas Marshall, a man defined by his wealth and arrogance, found himself accepting a wager that would irrevocably alter his path. Accustomed to success in both his business ventures and personal life, he thrived on competition. However, when his close associate Jack issued an audacious proposition during a high society New York gathering, Lucas's interest was piqued. With a knowing smirk, Jack laid down the challenge. "Let's see if this is a win you can secure, Lucas. I wager you wouldn't have the nerve to marry someone decidedly not your usual type." Lucas, whose dating history exclusively featured stunningly beautiful women, was momentarily taken aback. Yet never one to shy away from proving his mettle, he arched an eyebrow. "And the stakes?" he inquired. A mischievous glint in his eye, Jack lifted his champagne flute. $1 million to the victor. But the catch is, you must marry her and remain married for a minimum of 6 months. Spurred by the thrill of competition and the allure of the financial prize, Lucas agreed on the spot without a second thought. The woman Jack proposed was Chloe Richards, someone whose appearance didn't align with conventional standards of beauty. Lucas had never met her, but in his mind, this was simply another transaction he intended to conquer. A few days later, Lucas learned more about Chloe. She possessed confidence, independence, and a strong will, qualities entirely unlike the women he typically associated with. This detail intrigued him further. Used to being the one pulling the strings, he found himself wondering how he would handle someone seemingly unwilling to yield to his influence. Their initial encounter was set at an upscale restaurant. When Chloe arrived, Lucas instantly registered how distinct she was from anyone he'd previously encountered. She displayed no signs of being intimidated by the lavish setting or by Lucas himself. Instead, she met his stare directly, her confidence unwavering. "You must be Lucas Marshall," Chloe stated plainly as she took her seat. "And you must be Chloe Richards," Lucas retorted with a carefully managed smile, offering his hand. She paused for a beat before accepting his handshake with a firm grip, signaling her resolve. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Chloe began, her tone direct. "I'm aware of why we're meeting. I know about the wager, the stipulations, and the requirements." Lucas was surprised by her forthrightness but masked it well. "And yet, you still consented to meet?" he questioned, curious about her motives. Chloe paused, considering her response. "Let's just say I have my own reasons," she finally answered. "Don't underestimate me, Lucas. 6 months might seem brief, but much can transpire in that period. If you assume you can manipulate or control me, you are mistaken." A smile touched Lucas's lips. Chloe was indeed proving to be a greater challenge than he'd anticipated, which paradoxically only heightened his interest. As their first meeting concluded, Lucas found himself increasingly fascinated by Chloe. She was unlike anyone he knew. She wasn't intimidated by him, and that fact stirred his curiosity, perhaps even a sliver of admiration. In the following days, Lucas found himself preoccupied, contemplating his next move. He was accustomed to orchestrating the game, but it seemed Chloe possessed her own strategies. Their second meeting occurred at a modest cafe, a stark contrast to the glamorous eateries Lucas typically favored. Chloe had chosen the venue, and Lucas, intrigued, had agreed. He was keen to understand her better, who she was and why she'd consent to what amounted to a temporary marriage contract. Upon Lucas's arrival, Chloe was already present, sipping tea with a serene smile. She greeted him warmly, devoid of the coolness from their first encounter, yet still exuding that same unshakable self-assurance. "I pictured you favoring 5-star restaurants," Chloe teased as Lucas took his seat. "Sometimes a change of pace is beneficial," Lucas replied, attempting a casual tone, though he felt slightly out of his element. They engaged in small talk for a time, exchanging superficial details, but Chloe soon steered the conversation to the main point. "If we're genuinely proceeding with this, I need to establish a few things clearly," Chloe stated, setting her teacup down. "Your money and your luxurious lifestyle hold no interest for me. 6 months is 6 months, and my intention is to walk away from this arrangement exactly as I entered it." Lucas observed her intently. He sensed her sincerity. Chloe struck him as the kind of woman who knew her own mind, clearly not viewing marriage as a stepping stone for social advancement, unlike many others might. "So what is it you want, Chloe?" Lucas asked, his curiosity genuine. Freedom, she answered without pausing. I need you to understand that while we are entering this agreement, I will not be controlled by you. I have my own life, and that won't alter because of a temporary marriage. Lucas smiled. It wasn't the response he'd anticipated, but simultaneously, granting Chloe this independence didn't trouble him. To him, the marriage was merely a formality required to win the bet. If she wished to maintain her autonomy, it wouldn't interfere with his plans. Fine, Lucas conceded. 6 months. After that, we part ways. Chloe regarded him for a moment, seemingly assessing the sincerity of his agreement to her terms. She had accepted this challenge with a specific agenda and was resolute in ensuring everything unfolded according to her design. Deep down, she suspected Lucas might attempt to manipulate the circumstances, but she also had faith in her own fortitude to resist his sway. The meeting concluded amicably, both parties leaving with their roles seemingly established. Chloe would retain her independence, and Lucas would ensure the marriage remained purely contractual. Yet as the days dwindled and the wedding date drew near, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps this game was more intricate than he had initially perceived. The wedding itself was a chilly, business-like affair, conducted like a meticulously planned corporate agreement. Lucas Marshall, ever the strategist, already envisioned himself the victor of the wager. He felt certain the 6 months would pass quickly, and Chloe, regardless of her stubbornness, would inevitably succumb to the opulent lifestyle he was prepared to provide. Immediately following the ceremony, Lucas escorted Chloe to his sprawling penthouse apartment in the heart of New York City, a testament to his immense wealth. Vast glass windows mirrored the city's lights, while the interior boasted the most costly and exclusive furnishings. For Lucas, this was the true arena where he would conquer Chloe, wielding the influence of his material possessions. However, from the very outset, Chloe signaled her refusal to yield. Upon entering the penthouse, she adopted a detached manner. The gaze she directed at Lucas held no admiration, only defiance. 6 months, Lucas, not 1 day longer, she stated firmly, moving towards one of the expansive windows, surveying the city without apparent awe for the surrounding luxury. Lucas smirked, self-assured. He was familiar with this initial type of resistance. Every woman previously in his life had eventually yielded to his charm and riches. Chloe, he believed, would be no different, or so he presumed. During the initial days post-wedding, Lucas employed various tactics to impress her. He lavished her with expensive jewelry, designer apparel, and extravagant trips, fully expecting Chloe to begin assimilating into the lifestyle he dictated. Yet, much to his annoyance, she declined everything. Chloe remained steadfast in adhering to her simple, modest habits, never succumbing to the allure of affluence. I have no need for these things, Lucas, she would state, her calmness only intensifying his irritation. It vexed him profoundly. Lucas, accustomed to acquiring whatever he desired, was encountering a direct challenge to his authority for the first time. This was no longer solely about the bet. It had become personal. He had to win Chloe over somehow. He needed affirmation that ultimately he was the one in command. This prompted him to adopt more forceful tactics. He began obstructing her ability to go to work, offering excuses like, "You no longer require a salary," or citing "your responsibilities as my wife." When Chloe persisted, he deliberately caused her to wait for hours for meetings she deemed crucial. Lucas manipulated schedules and circumstances, anything to assert dominance, but Chloe refused to buckle. She stood like an immovable stone against Lucas's pressures, which only fueled his determination to break her spirit. Their interactions started to resemble a treacherous minefield. Minor provocations emerged during casual talks, where Chloe, with incisive remarks, skillfully neutralized every attempt Lucas made to make her feel subordinate or controlled. One particularly strained evening, Lucas attempted a more emotional strategy. "I don't comprehend you, Chloe," he said, observing her with a blend of frustration and intrigue. "Any other woman would be thrilled to embrace this kind of luxury, yet you behave as if it's insufficient. What is it you truly desire?" Chloe, who had remained impassive until that point, finally raised her eyes. They shone with an intensity Lucas hadn't foreseen. "What do I desire?" "I desire respect, Lucas. I am not merely a pawn on your chessboard. You believe you can sway me with money, but you're mistaken. Wealth cannot purchase dignity or integrity. You might be surrounded by all these possessions, but you are empty inside, and that is what you cannot tolerate." Her words struck him like a physical blow. For the first time, Lucas sensed he might be losing more than just control. Chloe wasn't merely resisting his influence, she was systematically dismantling the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for years. And that unnerved him. No one had ever dared challenge him in this manner, and the realization that Chloe saw past his affluence left Lucas feeling exposed. Yet instead of retreating, Lucas resolved to intensify his efforts. He began formulating plans to isolate Chloe, aiming to make her understand that her life would be significantly diminished without him. He severed her professional contacts, obstructed opportunities that could have advanced her career, and even interfered with important events she was organizing. Nevertheless, Chloe wasn't the type to be easily cowed. With each setback, she rose again, her resolve stronger than before. She clung fiercely to her dignity, refusing to be molded by Lucas's influence. Then one evening, Chloe played a card of her own. "Lucas, you believe you're pulling the strings, don't you?" she stated, her tone measured. "But what you fail to grasp is that I have my own strategy. And trust me, when the moment is right, you will comprehend that this entire charade is founded on something far larger than you could possibly conceive." Lucas stared at her, taken aback. For the first time, the thought occurred that he might have seriously underestimated Chloe. And also for the first time, he experienced a chilling fear that, in the final accounting, he might not emerge as the winner of this contest. The subsequent weeks felt like a taut cord, stretching tighter each day, poised to break. Lucas, consumed by his obsession with control, exhausted every means to bend the situation to his favor. But Chloe remained unyielding, like a fortress he couldn't breach. Each of his attempts seemed only to fortify her inner resolve. Yet there was an undeniable shift occurring within Lucas. As time progressed, he began to perceive Chloe in a new light. It wasn't merely respect for her resilience. Something more profound was stirring. She was achieving what no other woman ever had. She was disarming him emotionally. This left him feeling unsettled, perplexed. For the first time, he found himself considering her not as a component of a bet or an adversary, but as an individual he genuinely wished to understand. One night, following another contentious argument, Lucas found himself alone in the vast living area, gazing out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The familiar panorama of city lights, which usually instilled a sense of power, now felt utterly vacant. He questioned the source of these feelings. Chloe was supposed to be just a woman he'd married for a 6-month term, a mere piece in his strategic game. But the reality was, she was provoking something within him. He, who always maintained tight control over his emotions, was now undeniably affected. Chloe could see through his polished exterior, and that vulnerability unnerved him. While Lucas grappled with his internal turmoil, Chloe maintained her established routine. She appeared increasingly detached each day, almost as if she were biding her time. Lucas sensed an invisible barrier between them, one he couldn't penetrate, and it tormented him. He couldn't ascertain if it was pride or the fear of losing control, but something about Chloe captivated him in a way he'd never thought possible. "You seem different, Lucas," remarked Jack, his friend and the instigator of the bet, during a casual dinner. "Normally, you'd have everything firmly in hand by this stage, but it appears this woman is challenging you in an unprecedented way." Lucas managed a strained smile, unable to formulate an immediate response. He detested admitting Jack's accuracy, but it was undeniable that a change was underway. That evening, Lucas returned home resolute on clarifying matters. He needed to expel Chloe from his thoughts, to reaffirm to himself that this arrangement was purely contractual, nothing more. Entering the penthouse, he discovered Chloe seated on the sofa, engrossed in a book, seemingly oblivious to his arrival. "Can we talk?" Lucas inquired, shattering the silence that had become their customary dynamic. Chloe glanced up calmly, closed her book, and regarded him with a serene yet attentive gaze. "Of course," she replied, as though she had anticipated this conversation. Lucas sat opposite her, searching for the appropriate words. The tension between them was palpable. He recognized he could no longer treat this marriage as a simple formality. Something fundamental was shifting, and he needed to confront it directly. "What exactly are we doing here, Chloe?" he asked with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "This began as a game, a wager, but I'm no longer certain what to make of it." Chloe observed him for several seconds before answering. "I am not playing, Lucas. I never was." Her voice was quiet but resonant with meaning. "From the outset, I agreed to this marriage for reasons extending beyond you. I have no interest in the money or your attempts at control. I am here for something more significant. And if you haven't grasped that by now, perhaps it's time you opened your eyes." A tightness constricted Lucas's chest. It felt as if she were alluding to a secret he couldn't decipher. Frustration surged within him. "I know you have your secrets, Chloe, but what infuriates me is that the more I try to comprehend you, the more I realize I'm not in charge. And I despise that feeling." He abruptly stood, unable to remain still, as if the burden of this realization was too heavy to bear seated. Chloe remained composed, tracking his every movement. She rose slowly and walked toward him, stopping mere inches away. Lucas felt his pulse quicken. "Lucas," she began, her voice low and soft, "this isn't about control. You've navigated your entire life attempting to dominate everything and everyone. But with me, you'll have to accept that control isn't always the solution. Sometimes things simply must be allowed to be what they are." Lucas looked into her eyes, and for an instant, he felt a connection unlike any he'd experienced before. It was as though, for the first time, he was truly seeing Chloe, not as a piece in his game, but as herself. "So what do you want?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Chloe offered a mysterious smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "I want you to figure that out for yourself, Lucas." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his swirling thoughts. In the subsequent days, the chasm between them seemed to widen. Yet paradoxically, Lucas began to feel closer to Chloe than ever. He became obsessed with uncovering what she was concealing, discerning her true motives. Simultaneously, he felt his own self-control slipping. He resisted admitting it, but Chloe was fundamentally altering his perception of the world, and the very notion that she could affect him so profoundly terrified him. The 6 months of their marriage were nearing their end, but for Lucas Marshall, each passing day felt like an eternity. Sleep eluded him, his mind consumed by the impending revelation he sensed was close, making his stomach churn. Chloe had evolved into an enigmatic figure in his existence. He no longer viewed her merely as the woman he'd married due to a bet, but as someone possessing knowledge he couldn't access. The obsession to decipher Chloe consumed him entirely. He had exhausted every avenue, hiring private investigators, delving into her history, pursuing every potential clue, but it all seemed meticulously managed by Chloe herself. It felt as though she was consistently 2 steps ahead, manipulating the game from the very start. One evening, returning to the penthouse later than usual after a business engagement, Lucas found the balcony light illuminated. Chloe was seated there, gazing out over the New York skyline like a monarch surveying her domain. He instinctively knew this was the night everything would come to light. Lucas sensed she was prepared to disclose what he had been so desperate to learn, yet the fear of what he might discover tightened his throat. He approached her, the sound of his shoes echoing in the otherwise silent room. Chloe didn't immediately turn. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with the unspoken understanding that something devastating was imminent. "I need answers, Chloe," Lucas stated, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I can't endure this game any longer. You must tell me the truth." Chloe released a slow sigh and rose from her chair, turning to face him. Her eyes, typically calm and calculating, now held an emotion Lucas couldn't interpret. There was something different about her, something dark and fierce. "The truth, Lucas?" She offered a bitter smile, crossing her arms. "Are you truly prepared for the truth?" He nodded, not hesitating, but the tension in the air intensified with each passing moment. Lucas steeled himself for any revelation, but nothing could have equipped him for what was about to unfold. "You have no concept of who I really am," Chloe began, her voice laced with a chilling coldness. You've always viewed people as mere pawns on your grand chessboard. But this time, Lucas, you were the pawn. I've been orchestrating this game from the very beginning. A shiver traced its way down Lucas's spine. The unwavering certainty he'd always possessed about being in control started to disintegrate before her. He attempted to speak, but Chloe cut him off. "Do you recall the name Richards?" she pressed, her voice sharpening. "Of course you don't. People like you never remember. My father operated a small company, one struggling to stay afloat until you arrived, and annihilated it." Lucas recoiled, his eyes widening as his mind scrambled to connect the pieces. "What?" Lucas stammered, bewildered. "What are you saying?" Chloe advanced a step towards him, her eyes blazing with fury and anguish. "My father, Lucas, he was an honorable man, fighting to provide for our family until you entered the picture and stripped everything away. You destroyed him, Lucas. He lost absolutely everything, and that loss ultimately led to his death." Chloe paused, her voice momentarily cracking, before she pushed on, tears forming in her eyes. "My father took his own life because of your empire, your relentless pursuit of success at any cost." The force of her words struck Lucas like a physical blow. He stood frozen as fragmented memories began to surface. There had been countless deals, numerous contracts, so many lives impacted by his avaricious climb. He couldn't recall every single business he had crushed on his ascent to the top, but now abruptly, the ghosts of his past were converging to haunt him. "Chloe?" He tried to interject, desperate, but she held up a hand, silencing him. "No!" she cried out, her anger reaching a boiling point. "You have no comprehension of the devastation you caused. It's not merely about money, Lucas. It's about shattered lives. You robbed me of my father, the only person I had left in the world. And while you prospered, my mother and I descended into debt and desperation. You luxuriated in your wealth while we barely scraped by." Lucas was utterly stunned. He desperately wanted to speak, to offer some defense, but words failed him. All he could manage was to stand there staring at her, the immense weight of guilt crushing his chest. "But I meticulously planned everything," Chloe continued, her tone now more measured but still thick with resentment. "When I discovered the details of your bet, I recognized my opportunity. I approached you deliberately. I accepted the wager because I wanted you to experience even a fraction of the pain I endured. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to be manipulated, controlled, and ultimately left powerless." Lucas felt his body begin to shake. He had always assumed he was the master manipulator, always convinced he would emerge triumphant. But now the roles were dramatically reversed. He had been the target all along, and Chloe, the true player, had been commanding the entire game. "Chloe?" Lucas started to speak, but his voice was feeble. I had no idea. I didn't know you were—" "No, Lucas," Chloe interrupted, stepping closer until they were face to face. "You never knew because you never bothered to care. You demolished lives without a shred of remorse. And now I stand here, not to ruin you utterly, but to ensure you never ever forget the consequences of your actions. I want you to carry the pain you inflicted. And that pain, Lucas, will shadow you for the remainder of your days." Chloe's words descended upon him like a final judgment. Lucas was confronted with something entirely foreign to his experience: the tangible repercussions of his choices. The burden of guilt was overwhelming, and he knew in that instant that he had forfeited far more than just a simple bet. He had lost something irretrievable. Chloe stepped back, the ensuing silence echoing through the opulent penthouse. Lucas felt his strength abandon him, and he collapsed onto the sofa, utterly speechless, devoid of answers. All that lingered was a profound emptiness. Chloe's devastating revelation echoed in Lucas's mind like an unceasing storm. Each word she uttered dismantled, piece by piece, the reality he thought he commanded. The woman he believed he could manipulate, whom he'd regarded as a mere pawn in his game of power and wagers, had just completely overturned the board. For the first time, Lucas was utterly lost, unsure how to proceed. For the first time, he was genuinely stripped of all control. Chloe, however, offered him no respite to absorb the shock. After delivering the crushing truth about her family's ruin and her father's suicide, she departed the room, leaving him isolated with his crushing guilt. Lucas remained motionless, the atmosphere in the penthouse growing heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in. He desperately wanted to speak to her, to apologize, to somehow rationalize the irrational, but the truth was, words failed him. How could he possibly justify an act so callous, one that had inflicted such profound suffering? In the days that followed her confession, Chloe enacted precisely what Lucas dreaded most. She began to completely disregard his presence. Her existence became a constant, silent accusation of his failures. She moved past him as if he were invisible, as if his very being was insignificant. At breakfast, she sat in the stony silence, rarely meeting his gaze. When he attempted to initiate conversation, his words evaporated into the tense air, unable to breach the formidable wall she had erected between them. Lucas, accustomed to dominating any room, to being the focal point, now found himself utterly ignored within his own residence. This lack of acknowledgement was agonizing. Chloe interacted with the household staff and managed her personal affairs, but towards Lucas, it was as if he ceased to exist. The weight of this imposed silence began to systematically dismantle the man he once believed himself to be. "Chloe," he attempted one morning as she readied herself to leave, "we need to talk." She paused, her back still to him, adjusting her coat. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. Lucas waited, anxious for any form of response. Even anger would have been preferable to this chilling indifference. But Chloe uttered nothing. She simply walked out, the soft click of the closing door resonating in the emptiness, leaving Lucas alone with the echo. The pain of being ignored by someone he was starting to perceive as much more than an opponent was a novel experience for Lucas. He was used to commanding, to achieving victory. Now he was the one being manipulated, punished through silence and contempt. Each time she left him standing there, unheard, the sense of powerlessness intensified. And this was merely the beginning. Chloe's strategy extended beyond mere silence. She began actively eroding Lucas's self-assurance through small, yet piercing actions. At work, he started to observe that crucial meetings were being mysteriously rescheduled without his knowledge. His business judgments were abruptly called into question, and projects he had personally launched began to inexplicably falter. He knew intuitively that Chloe was behind it, even though she never acknowledged her involvement. Lucas felt her influence subtly manipulating the invisible threads that constituted his professional life. At home, the situation deteriorated further. Chloe adopted an attitude of utter disdain, deliberately spurning any of Lucas's attempts at reconciliation. She ceased sharing meals with him and evaded any conversation that ventured beyond the most superficial level. When he pursued her, trying to mend the rift, Chloe met him with frigid glances, as if his mere presence was an irritation. One evening, Lucas discovered her in the living room, absorbed in a book. The scene appeared tranquil, yet he recognized this calm as a silent, dangerous trap. He sat on the sofa, making another attempt to communicate. "Chloe," he began, his voice low, almost pleading, "I understand I've done terrible things. I know I've caused you immense pain, but please, can we attempt to resolve this? Can we at least talk?" Chloe slowly lowered her book, not looking at him immediately. When her eyes finally met his, her expression was so glacial it sent a shiver down his spine. "Talk?" she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You believe there's anything left to discuss? You desire words, Lucas, after everything you've perpetrated? Words are futile now." "I was wrong, Chloe. I realize that," Lucas insisted, rising from the sofa and moving closer, desperate for any sign of connection. "I would do anything to rectify what I've done. I can change, I promise." She finally looked directly at him, her gaze sharp, seemingly daring him to substantiate his claims. "Change?" she questioned, standing slowly. "Do you honestly think changing now erases the past? Will it resurrect my father? Will it undo the years of hardship we endured because of you?" "No, Lucas, it won't." She stepped nearer, and Lucas felt himself shrink under the intensity of her stare. "Whatever you do now isn't for my benefit, it's for yours. You will bear this burden, this guilt, for the rest of your existence." Lucas stood in silence. For the first time, he grasped that there would be no simple path to redemption, no immediate forgiveness. He yearned to fight for something salvageable, but Chloe seemed beyond any straightforward repair. In the ensuing days, Chloe intensified her campaign of subtle punishments. Lucas frequently encountered looks of contempt whenever their paths crossed, and his mounting frustration morphed into desperation. He tried numerous ways to demonstrate his transformation, his desire to become better, but each effort was met with indifference or sharp sarcasm. One night, after a particularly disastrous work meeting where a vital project had clearly been sabotaged, Lucas returned home to find Chloe on the phone, laughing. He caught snippets of her conversation and realized she was discussing his professional decisions. He knew it was her handiwork. Chloe was systematically dismantling everything he had built, but with such calculated subtlety that only he could perceive the pattern, and she forced him to endure it in silence. When Chloe concluded her call, Lucas was waiting in the living room. He stared at her, his face etched with exhaustion, suppressed anger, and undeniable pain. "You're tearing everything down, aren't you?" he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of frustration. "At work here, you're destroying my life." Chloe regarded him with an impassive expression, crossing her arms. "Destroying your life?" she queried, raising an eyebrow. "I'm merely returning the favor you extended." "Don't fret, Lucas. I won't bankrupt you financially. That would be too easy. I want you to live with the anguish. I want you to feel every minor loss, just as I did. I want you every single day to witness the crumbling of everything you constructed and know unequivocally that it is your own doing." Lucas felt the floor vanish beneath him yet again. It was a waking nightmare. He had always been the victor, the man who dictated the fates of others. Now he was the quarry in a cold, meticulous vendetta. Chloe didn't seek swift destruction. She aimed for prolonged suffering, inflicted daily through small defeats and dismissive glances, until nothing remained but regret. Weeks crawled by as Chloe continued her strategy of disregard and punishment. Lucas, once the epitome of arrogance and confidence, now moved through the house like a ghost of his former self, desperately trying, in every conceivable way, to earn a forgiveness he knew might never be granted. He attempted acts of atonement, but his gestures always fell short. He was ensnared in a loop of guilt and pain, a cycle orchestrated flawlessly by Chloe. But the ultimate blow was yet to come. One night, Chloe finally confronted him directly, her demeanor colder than Lucas had ever witnessed. She approached him as he sat on the sofa, utterly depleted and broken, and delivered the words that would echo in his mind indefinitely. "Lucas, you took something from me that is irreplaceable," she began, her voice calm yet razor-sharp. "Now I am returning the gesture, and you will live with the consequences for the rest of your life." With those final words, Chloe left him there, nothing more needing to be said. The punishment was already in full effect, and Lucas knew, with chilling certainty, that he would never be the same again. Lucas Marshall felt ensnared in a labyrinth constructed of guilt and despair. Chloe had masterfully succeeded in forcing him to confront the feeling of being utterly powerless. The weeks following her second, even more devastating revelation had been torturous. The confident, self-assured man who believed he orchestrated everything around him was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out version of his former self. Every attempt to engage with Chloe was met with icy stares, deliberate ignorance, and outright rejection. Her indifference gnawed at him constantly. Sleep offered no escape, his thoughts consumed by the desperate need to somehow mend the immense damage he had caused. Yet the sheer weight of his past actions made any path toward reconciliation seem insurmountable. However, a subtle transformation began within Lucas. He came to understand that mere words held no currency anymore. Apologies were meaningless. Chloe needed to witness tangible proof of change, a genuine metamorphosis. And he found himself willing to undertake anything to demonstrate that to her. Actions, not hollow promises, were required. One morning, Lucas awoke with newfound resolve. He knew he couldn't simply request forgiveness. He needed a different approach. The initial step was to grant Chloe the space she required. She needed to see his respect for her boundaries, his willingness not to pressure her. But simultaneously, he had to convey his continued presence through subtle, yet significant gestures. Lucas started observing the small details that constituted Chloe's existence. He noted her daily habits, her preferences, her dislikes. He didn't shadow her or intrude upon her space, but he mentally cataloged the things she appreciated. Flowers, particularly peonies, the aroma of her morning coffee, always robust, unsweetened. These once trivial details now represented the foundation of his attempt to reconnect. That same afternoon, Lucas visited one of the city's finest florists and purchased a bouquet of peonies. He refrained from presenting them directly to Chloe, anticipating immediate rejection. Instead, he placed the flowers on the kitchen table. No card, just a simple, meaningful presence. He waited anxiously while she was out. Upon Chloe's return, she discovered the bouquet. She offered no comment, but Lucas, watching discreetly, observed the precise moment she paused before the flowers. Her expression remained unchanged, yet he saw her lift a single bloom to inhale its fragrance. It was a minuscule gesture, but for Lucas, it felt like a breakthrough. Chloe hadn't instantly dismissed them. In the subsequent days, Lucas maintained these quiet offerings. He meticulously arranged the breakfast table, preparing her coffee exactly to her liking, strong, no sugar, and then discreetly withdrew, careful not to impose. He left small items she enjoyed within easy reach, always avoiding forced encounters or demands for conversation. Gradually, he aimed to demonstrate his transformation, his attentiveness, his genuine desire to care for her. But Chloe remained guarded. The barrier between them persisted, and Lucas understood that dismantling it would require significant time. Still, he refused to abandon his efforts. He was determined to show her he was different, that he could potentially earn her trust back, but strictly on her terms, respecting the space she needed. A shift occurred on a particularly chilly evening. Chloe stood on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, observing the city lights. After a moment's hesitation, Lucas approached her, carrying a cup of hot tea, knowing she often enjoyed a warm drink before retiring. "Here, I thought you might appreciate something warm," he offered, keeping his tone calm, careful not to intrude. Chloe didn't respond immediately but accepted the cup, her gaze still fixed on the cityscape. Lucas stood beside her in silence, simply aiming to be present without being overbearing. The quiet between them felt charged, but for the first time in weeks, it lacked its usual unbearable weight. It felt as though something, however subtle, was beginning to change. "Why are you doing this, Lucas?" Chloe finally broke the silence, her voice soft yet firm. Lucas knew this was a crucial opportunity, but he had to proceed cautiously. He took a deep breath before answering, his eyes joining hers and looking out at the horizon. "Because I've realized words don't mean anything anymore," he began. "My words are empty. What I did cannot be undone with apologies. But I am trying to show you that I am changing. I want to become a better person, not solely for you, but because I recognize the necessity for myself." Chloe remained quiet for a few more seconds, still cradling the teacup. The cold wind swept past them, but the tension seemed to have lessened slightly. "You cannot change the past, Lucas," she eventually stated, her voice softer than he'd anticipated. "I know," he replied with sincerity, "but I can influence the future." Chloe turned to look at him then, truly look at him, for the first time that night. Lucas detected something different in her eyes. The hardness lingered, but there was also a flicker of curiosity. She wasn't ready to forgive fully. He understood that, but this felt like a pivotal moment. He had touched upon something she might, perhaps, want to believe possible. In the following days, Lucas persisted with his small gestures, but a new dynamic settled between them. Chloe maintained her distance, yet she no longer rejected him with the same overt hostility. She accepted the flowers, the cups of tea, and even permitted brief, superficial conversations during breakfast. The walls were beginning to lower, albeit gradually. The true test, however, arrived one evening as Lucas prepared to leave for a meeting. Dressed for business, he was stopped as Chloe entered the room, her expression unreadable. "Can you cancel your meeting?" she asked unexpectedly. Lucas stared, surprised. She hadn't shown any interest in his schedule since their relationship fractured. He hesitated only briefly before nodding, retrieving his phone and canceling the engagement without a second thought. It was the first instance in weeks Chloe seemed open to spending time with him, and he wasn't going to let the chance slip away. They sat on the sofa, a slight distance maintained between them, but for the first time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Chloe appeared contemplative, as if processing the tumultuous events of the preceding months. "I'm not prepared to forgive you entirely, Lucas," Chloe stated, breaking the quiet. "But you are demonstrating something different. I see your effort, and perhaps that marks the beginning of something." Lucas felt his heart pound. He knew he couldn't rush things, but Chloe's words offered a vital spark of hope. The path ahead remained long and arduous, but he was willing to traverse every step if it meant earning back her trust, and maybe eventually her love. The rest of the evening unfolded peacefully, the two conversing about inconsequential matters. For Lucas, however, it represented a significant victory. He was painstakingly rebuilding something, armed with patience. Chloe was no longer an impenetrable fortress. She was starting to lower her defenses, and Lucas vowed not to repeat the mistake of underestimating her. Yet, a shadow still loomed. Lucas sensed Chloe hadn't revealed the complete story. There was something she held back, some final piece, and he needed to be ready to confront it. But for the present moment, the fact that Chloe was willing to engage, to simply talk, was sufficient. The weeks following that quiet evening were a delicate blend of tension and budding hope. For the first time in what felt like an age, Lucas sensed he was making genuine headway with Chloe. She no longer treated him with overt hostility, yet she hadn't fully let him back in either. An undercurrent of hesitation lingered, a sense of waiting that kept him perpetually on edge. He understood he was undergoing a trial, and he was prepared to face it. What he didn't anticipate was the magnitude of the revelation still to come. Lucas devoted himself entirely to proving his transformation to Chloe. He adjusted work commitments to be home more, ensuring his availability without being demanding or pressuring her for immediate resolution. Small routines, like sharing breakfast or engaging in light evening conversation, became established rituals. Slowly, the frost between them thawed, and Lucas observed that Chloe's disdain had softened. Nevertheless, an unsettling feeling persisted. Despite the visible progress, Lucas felt certain Chloe harbored a remaining secret. She occasionally became reserved, deflecting deeper discussions about their past or potential future. It was as though she awaited the opportune moment to speak, but Lucas remained unaware of what that entailed. Then on a quiet night, with rain gently drumming against the penthouse windows, Lucas noticed a distinct shift in Chloe's demeanor. She seemed more withdrawn, more introspective than usual, lost in her own thoughts. He resisted the urge to pry, but his curiosity gnawed at him. What was she concealing? What crucial element remained unspoken? Finally, when the silence stretched to an unbearable length, Lucas carefully breached the barrier. "Chloe," he began, his voice low, tinged with apprehension. "I sense there's still something between us, something you haven't shared. I can feel it." He met her eyes, searching for any indication, any reaction. "Please, if there's something you're still holding back, I need to know." Chloe, seated on the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, drew a deep breath, initially averting his gaze. The ensuing silence was agonizing, but Lucas forced himself to be patient, knowing any pressure now could unravel all the progress made. At last, she looked at him, her eyes mirroring a complex mixture of pain and resolve. "You're correct, Lucas," she admitted, her voice soft yet heavy with emotion. "I have been withholding something. Something I wasn't sure I could ever tell you, until now. But perhaps the time has come." Lucas felt the air constrict around him. Whatever this was, he knew it possessed the power to alter everything. He leaned forward slightly, bracing himself for the impending revelation, yet simultaneously dreading its content. "Do you remember the company you destroyed?" Chloe began, her tone firm, though her expression betrayed deep-seated pain. "The one my father managed? I told you that your actions ruined our family, and that is the truth. But that wasn't the only thing you destroyed." Lucas looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Chloe lowered her gaze, battling the tears that threatened to spill. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost a whisper. "I was pregnant, Lucas." The words struck Lucas with the force of a physical blow. He blinked, struggling to process the information, finding it utterly unbelievable. "What?" he whispered, stunned into silence. "I was pregnant then, when everything collapsed," Chloe continued, her eyes still fixed on the floor. "And when we lost everything, when my father was gone, the immense pressure, the stress of it all, I lost the baby." Lucas felt as if the ground had literally vanished beneath him. He could barely draw breath. The impact of this revelation hit him harder than anything before, a gut-wrenching truth he could never have conceived. The guilt that had relentlessly consumed him for weeks now intensified exponentially. He hadn't just destroyed a business, a family. He had destroyed a potential life. "Chloe," he attempted to speak, but his voice was choked with emotion. I did. No, I never could have imagined." She finally met his gaze, and the tears she had suppressed now streamed freely down her face. Even marked by such profound pain, an undeniable strength emanated from her. "No, you didn't know," Chloe confirmed, her voice thick with hurt and lingering resentment. "Because you never cared enough to find out. You obliterated lives, Lucas, without ever glancing at the people caught in your path. I lost my child, and you continued your life as if nothing significant had occurred." Her words pierced Lucas like daggers. He desperately wanted to do something, say something that could possibly mitigate the harm he'd caused, but he knew deep down that no action or utterance could erase Chloe's suffering. I don't have the words," Lucas finally managed, his voice weak, saturated with despair. "I know what I did is unforgivable, and I will never forgive myself for it. But please, Chloe, I would do absolutely anything to try and make amends. Anything." Chloe observed him for a long, silent moment. The quiet that followed felt heavy, laden with unspoken history. Lucas knew nothing he said could restore the lost child or rewrite the past, but he clung desperately to the hope of finding some way, any way, to alleviate even a fraction of Chloe's pain. Finally, Chloe took another deep breath and closed her eyes, appearing to make an internal decision. When she opened them again, her expression had shifted. The raw pain remained, but something else was present too. Something Lucas couldn't quite decipher. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Lucas," she stated with raw honesty. "What you did, what transpired, it was devastating." She paused, seemingly weighing her next words carefully. "But," she continued, "I can see that you are genuinely trying. And maybe, just maybe, there's a possibility that one day I can find a way to move forward. But it won't be simple. It won't happen quickly." Lucas nodded, feeling a confusing mix of hope and despair. He understood the immense difficulty of the road ahead, but at least Chloe was willing to entertain the possibility of a different future. "I'll do whatever it takes," Lucas responded, his voice imbued with determination. "No matter how long it requires. I will prove to you that I have changed, that I can become someone you can trust, someone you might, one day, be able to forgive." Chloe looked at him, and for the very first time, there seemed to be a small opening. It wasn't absolution, nor was it the end of the hurt, but it was something. It was a potential beginning. "We'll see," Chloe said with a soft sigh. "We'll see if you can." The silence that settled between them was heavy, but now also held a fragile sense of possibility. Chloe stood and walked toward the door, leaving Lucas alone on the sofa once more. This time, however, he didn't feel the same crushing despair as before. He knew an arduous journey lay ahead, but at least now there was a glimmer of hope. The days following Chloe's final, heart-wrenching revelation marked a profound turning point for Lucas. Every word she had spoken resonated deeply within him, the weight of the pain he'd inflicted a constant presence. Yet instead of succumbing to immobilizing regret, Lucas resolved to channel that pain and guilt into fuel for genuine change. His objective shifted beyond merely winning back Chloe's affection. He now aspired to become a man deserving of her respect and the respect of the countless others harmed by his ruthless business practices over the years. That morning, Lucas made a pivotal decision. He refused to remain passive, allowing his past to dictate his future indefinitely. He would begin anew, and the first crucial step involved repairing as much of the damage as possible, providing tangible evidence to Chloe of his sincere transformation. He started by systematically tracking down the families whose lives had been overturned by his past business dealings. His initial visit took him to the family of a former competitor whose company he had driven into ruin years prior. Arriving unannounced, he knocked on the door of a modest home in a neighborhood, starkly contrasting the opulence he inhabited. The man who answered was unfamiliar to Lucas, but the pain etched in his eyes was instantly recognizable. "I'm Lucas Marshall," Lucas stated, his voice carrying a sincerity that felt foreign even to himself. "I've come here to apologize." The man stared for a long moment, disbelief stark on his face. "Apologize?" he scoffed bitterly. "What difference will that make now?" "I cannot alter the past," Lucas replied firmly, "but I can endeavor to help rebuild the future. I am here to offer compensation, to assist in mending what I broke." Over the subsequent weeks, Lucas continued this journey of atonement. He knocked on numerous doors, met with various families, offering not just financial restitution, but also his time and effort, genuinely seeking to comprehend the full impact of his past actions. He began channeling substantial funds to small businesses adversely affected by his corporate strategies, establishing recovery initiatives to aid other entrepreneurs in rebuilding their livelihoods. Chloe observed these developments from a distance. Initially cautious, she watched Lucas's actions closely. She acknowledged his efforts to change, but forgiveness remained a complex, unearned entity. However, as the days unfolded and Lucas consistently demonstrated genuine transformation, a new feeling began to emerge within her towards him. A renewed sense of respect, perhaps even admiration, that she hadn't anticipated. He was changing, proving that his words were no longer mere platitudes. One evening, Chloe stood on the balcony, gazing at the city lights, when Lucas quietly joined her. He had just returned from another reconciliation visit, and his demeanor seemed different, calmer, more resolute. "How did it go today?" Chloe inquired, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. Lucas let out a deep sigh, one that seemed to carry the weight of months of effort and regret. "Difficult," he admitted, "but necessary. Every conversation, every apology, it's a step towards becoming a better person. Not just for you, Chloe, for myself as well." She finally turned to face him. A noticeable shift had occurred in her gaze too. The hardness that had long defined it, the anger she had understandably clung to, appeared to have softened. In that moment, she recognized the depth of Lucas's transformation. He was no longer the arrogant tycoon who had stormed into her life via a bet. He was someone actively striving to be different, someone willing to fight for a shared future. "I can see that, Lucas," Chloe acknowledged, her voice soft yet firm. "And I want you to know, I'm ready to try. Perhaps it's time we put the past behind us and attempt to build something new." A wave of relief washed over Lucas, a release he hadn't fully realized he'd been anticipating. Those words held more significance for him than he could articulate. Chloe was willing to grant them a chance, not as the couple arbitrarily bound by a wager, but as two individuals prepared to genuinely start over. As the mandated 6-month duration of their marriage agreement neared its conclusion, something unexpected began to unfold. Chloe and Lucas found themselves drawing closer. Their interactions became less formal, stripped of the earlier tension. They started sharing moments of laughter, forging connections, and gradually love began to bloom in a manner neither had foreseen. They were no longer the detached pair trapped within an arranged contract. They were evolving into two people rediscovering each other with genuine warmth and sincerity. One evening, just as the 6-month mark approached, Lucas arranged a special dinner. He knew this moment was critical. They had navigated immense challenges together, and he didn't want their connection to simply dissolve with the expiration of the agreement. "Chloe," he began during the meal, his voice betraying a nervousness he hadn't expected, "I know our arrangement is nearly complete, but I don't want this to be the end. I don't want us to end. I've fallen in love with you, Chloe, truly, and I want us to move forward, but this time as a real couple. No more bets, no games." Chloe looked at him, surprised by the depth of his sincerity, yet her own heart felt warmed. She recognized she harbored feelings for him too, emotions that had quietly taken root over the recent weeks. They had commenced as adversaries, but now improbably they found themselves in love, a deep, authentic connection. I love you too, Lucas, Chloe responded, her voice gentle but resolute. And I want to try. I want to build something meaningful with you. But this time, as equals, as a genuine couple. Those moments were filled with pure happiness for both. They had surmounted obstacles that once seemed insurmountable, and now stood ready to embrace a future together. Months later, Chloe began noticing unfamiliar changes in her body, morning nausea, sensations she hadn't experienced before. A medical checkup confirmed her suspicion. She was pregnant. When Chloe shared the news with Lucas, his reaction was one of unadulterated joy. He embraced her tightly, a mixture of laughter and tears flowing freely. Everything they had endured, all the pain and heartache, seemed to culminate in this poignant moment of renewal. They were prepared to embark on a new chapter, anticipating the arrival of their growing family. I want to do this properly this time, Lucas declared, knowing precisely the right course of action. I want to marry you again, but this time authentically, not because of any wager, not for any external reason, but solely because I love you and desire to spend the rest of my life with you. Chloe smiled, her own tears of happiness mingling with his. I want that too, Lucas, she replied softly. This time, it will be a real wedding, a true fresh start. Their subsequent wedding was an intimate affair, celebrated with a small circle of close friends and family. There was no superficial extravagance, no underlying pressure from business deals or bets, just Chloe and Lucas, united by genuine love, prepared to face whatever the future held together. Lucas understood he still had much to prove, not only to Chloe, but also to himself and the families he had wronged in his past. Yet now he had a profound motivation, a new life alongside the woman he cherished and the child they eagerly awaited. And this time, he was resolutely committed to being the man Chloe deserved and the father their child would need. As they swayed gently during their first dance at the reception, Chloe rested her head against Lucas's chest and whispered, "Who could have possibly imagined? It all began with a bet." Lucas smiled, holding her closer. "Who could have imagined," he echoed, "it would turn out to be the best wager I ever made." And with a future brimming with love, redemption, and boundless hope, they stood poised and ready for the next chapter of their lives. What are your thoughts? Did Chloe make the right decision in forgiving Lucas and choosing to marry him again? We invite you to share your perspective in the comments below. We're eager to hear what you think. Your engagement is incredibly valuable to us. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel for more narratives like this one. Thank you for watching.